Last night, Jimmy Kimmel Live erupted into chaos, as host Jimmy Kimmel clashed with Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary ever. Their fiery debate over the Trump administration spiraled into a viral showdown, leaving Kimmel shaken and Leavitt standing tall. The stage was set for a routine late-night interview, but the air crackled with tension from the moment Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set. The audience, buzzing with anticipation, sensed something big was coming. Kimmel, known for his sharp wit and liberal leanings, had been vocal about his disdain for the Trump administration, and Leavitt, at just 28, was a rising star in conservative politics, appointed by Trump to be the face of his White House communications. Her poised demeanor and unapologetic defense of the administration had already made her a polarizing figure, and Kimmel wasn't about to let her off easy. The segment began innocently enough, with Kimmel tossing out a few light-hearted jabs about Leavitt's rapid rise to fame. "So, Karoline, you went from campaign staffer to White House press secretary faster than most people can get a coffee order," he quipped, earning a chuckle from the crowd. Leavitt smiled, her eyes steady, and replied, "Well, Jimmy, when you're working for a president who moves at the speed of the American people, you learn to keep up." The audience clapped, but Kimmel's grin tightened. He wasn't here for pleasantries. The conversation quickly pivoted to the Trump administration's policies, and that's when the gloves came off. Kimmel leaned forward, his tone shifting from playful to pointed. "Let's talk about the elephant in the room," he said. "Your boss has been accused of spreading misinformation, undermining elections, and cozying up to some pretty questionable world leaders. How do you sleep at night defending that?" The audience gasped, some cheering, others murmuring uncomfortably. Leavitt didn't flinch. "Jimmy, I sleep just fine, knowing I'm defending a president who's fighting for the American people against a media that twists the truth to fit their narrative," she shot back, her voice calm but firm. Kimmel scoffed, clearly caught off guard by her composure. "Oh, come on, Karoline. The media. You're out here dodging questions like a pro, but you can't dodge the facts. Trump's been caught in lie after lie." He pulled out a stack of papers, waving them for emphasis. "I've got a list right here of 50 falsehoods from his last rally alone." The crowd roared, egging him on. Leavitt raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "And I've got a list of 50 times the media spun a story to make him look bad, Jimmy. Want to trade?" The audience erupted, split between cheers and boos. The exchange grew hotter by the second. Kimmel pressed Leavitt on Trump's recent comments about election integrity, accusing the administration of sowing distrust. "You're enabling a dangerous narrative," he said, his voice rising. Leavitt countered, "No, Jimmy. What's dangerous is a media that calls half the country deplorable while pretending they're impartial." Her words landed like a punch, and the crowd's reaction was deafening. Kimmel's face reddened, and he leaned back, trying to regain control. "You're good at this. I'll give you that," he said, but his sarcasm barely masked his frustration. As the segment continued, Kimmel's questions became more aggressive, each one designed to trip Leavitt up. He brought up Trump's foreign policy, his tax cuts, even his social media posts, painting a picture of chaos. Leavitt, however, refused to crumble. For every accusation, she had a rebuttal, delivered with a confidence that seemed to rattle Kimmel more with each passing minute. "You're not answering the question," he snapped at one point, slamming his hand on the desk. Leavitt smiled, faintly. "I'm answering, Jimmy. You're just not hearing what you want." By now the audience was on edge, hanging on every word. Social media was already lighting up with clips of the exchange, and the hashtag #KimmelVsLeavitt was trending. Kimmel, sensing he was losing ground, decided to go for a knockout blow. "Karoline, let's be real," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're young, you're smart, but you're working for a man who's tearing this country apart. Don't you ever think about jumping ship?" The question hung in the air, and the room went silent. Leavitt leaned forward, her eyes locked on Kimmel's, and said, "Jimmy, I'm not here to jump ship. I'm here to steer it through. The storm you and your friends in the media keep brewing." The crowd exploded and Kimmel's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to turn the tables, and it showed. As the segment neared its end, Kimmel's frustration was palpable. He tried to pivot to a lighter topic, but the damage was done. Leavitt had held her ground, and the audience knew it. The camera caught Kimmel fidgeting with his notes, his usual charm replaced by a strained smile. Leavitt, meanwhile, sat back, her expression serene but triumphant. The stage was set for an even bigger showdown, and backstage, producers were already scrambling to figure out how to handle the fallout. What would Kimmel do next to regain control? The Jimmy Kimmel Live stage hummed with unease as the first segment ended, but the cameras kept rolling. Kimmel, visibly rattled, tried to steer the conversation to safer ground, tossing out a question about Leavitt's life before politics. "So, Karoline, you're from New Hampshire, right? Tell us about growing up there. Something normal," he said, forcing a chuckle. The audience laughed lightly, but Leavitt saw through the tactic. "Oh, Jimmy, you want normal? I grew up in a small town where people still trust each other, not like the media bubble you live in," she replied, her tone polite but laced with steel. The crowd murmured, some clapping, others shifting uncomfortably. Kimmel's smile faltered. He wasn't about to let her take control again. Leaning forward, he dropped the pleasantries. "You keep blaming the media, Karoline, but let's talk about your role. You're the one out there every day, spinning Trump's chaos into gold. How do you justify that to yourself?" The question was sharp, meant to cut, and the audience leaned in, sensing blood in the water. Leavitt didn't blink. "I justify it by knowing I'm speaking for millions of Americans who feel ignored by people like you, Jimmy. They're tired of being lectured by elites who think they know better." Her voice was steady, her gaze unflinching. The crowd erupted, split between cheers and jeers, and Kimmel's eyes narrowed. The exchange escalated fast. Kimmel pulled out a clip from one of Leavitt's recent press briefings, where she'd deflected questions about Trump's latest legal battles. Playing it on the screen, he smirked. "This is you, dodging like a champ. You call that transparency?" The audience laughed, but Leavitt was ready. "Transparency is answering questions, Jimmy, not feeding the media's gotcha games. You want real talk? Ask me something that matters to Americans, not your ratings." The jab landed hard, and the crowd roared. Kimmel's face flushed, and he snapped, "You think this is a game? You're defending a man who's been indicted multiple times." His voice cracked with anger, and the room went quiet. Leavitt leaned forward, her calm demeanor, a stark contrast to Kimmel's rising temper. "And you're attacking a man who's fighting for people who can't afford to live in your world, Jimmy. You want to talk indictments? Let's talk about the media's selective outrage." She listed off examples, stories she claimed were buried to protect liberal allies. The audience was split, some shouting in agreement, others booing. Kimmel slammed his hand on the desk. "That's nonsense, and you know it. You're just parroting Trump's talking points." His outburst drew gasps, and Leavitt smiled faintly. "No, Jimmy. I'm speaking for the people who don't trust you anymore." The tension was electric. Kimmel, desperate to regain the upper hand, pivoted to a personal attack. "You're 28, Karoline. You've got your whole career ahead of you. Why hitch your wagon to a sinking ship?" The question was meant to sting, but Leavitt's response was ice cold. "Because I believe in the mission, Jimmy, and I'm not afraid of a little rough water." The crowd exploded, and Kimmel's jaw clenched. He tried to laugh it off, but his unease was obvious. Social media was ablaze, with Yash Kimmel vs. Leavitt trending worldwide. Clips of Leavitt's calm retorts were racking up millions of views, while Kimmel's outbursts were being memed into oblivion. Backstage, producers were in a frenzy. The confrontation was ratings gold, but Kimmel's unraveling was a problem. They urged him to dial it back, but he was too far gone. As the segment continued, he doubled down, accusing Leavitt of blind loyalty. "You're smart, Karoline, but you're wasting it on a con man," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The audience gasped, and Leavitt's eyes flashed with controlled anger. "And you're wasting your platform bullying people you don't understand, Jimmy. America deserves better." The crowd went wild, and Kimmel's hands shook as he shuffled his notes. The segment ended with Kimmel trying to wrap things up, but his usual charm was gone. "We'll be right back," he muttered, barely looking at Leavitt. She sat back, serene but steely, knowing she'd won the round. The audience was buzzing, and online, the debate was raging. Kimmel's team knew they couldn't let this slide. He had to come out swinging in the next segment, or Leavitt would own the narrative. But could he keep his cool, or was he about to make things even worse? The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio pulsed with raw energy as the show returned from a brief pause. The audience, still reeling from the earlier clash, was restless, their murmurs filling the air. Jimmy Kimmel, now back in his chair, gripped his mug tightly, his knuckles white. He forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed a simmering anger. Karoline Leavitt sat across from him, her posture relaxed, her expression one of quiet confidence. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every nuance of their standoff. Online, the internet was a wildfire, with Kimmel vs. Leavitt trending at #1, and clips of Leavitt's sharp retorts going viral. Kimmel's team had huddled backstage, urging him to pivot to humor and avoid another meltdown, but the host had other plans. Kimmel opened the segment with a barbed joke. "Welcome back, folks. I hope Karoline's had time to practice her deflections, because we're not done yet," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. The audience laughed nervously, unsure where this was headed. Leavitt tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I don't need practice, Jimmy. I'm just here to tell the truth, whether you like it or not." The crowd erupted, some cheering her boldness, others booing her defiance. Kimmel's jaw tightened, and he leaned forward, ready to strike. He launched into a new line of attack, this time focusing on Trump's economic policies. "Your boss claims he's the best thing for the economy, but gas prices are up, groceries are through the roof, and small businesses are struggling. You call that winning?" he asked, his voice sharp. The audience clapped, sensing Kimmel was back in control. Leavitt didn't miss a beat. "Jimmy, you're cherry-picking. Under Trump, we've seen record-low unemployment for minorities, tax cuts for the middle class, and a stock market that's climbing despite global headwinds. You want to talk pain? Talk about the policies your friends pushed that crushed small businesses during lockdowns." Her response was measured but cutting, and the crowd's reaction was a chaotic mix of cheers and jeers. Kimmel's face reddened. He hadn't expected her to flip the script again. "That's a nice talking point, Karoline, but you're dodging the real issue. People are hurting, and Trump's out there golfing while you clean up his mess." His voice rose, and the audience gasped at his aggression. Leavitt remained unruffled. "People are hurting, Jimmy, because the media amplifies fear and division instead of solutions. I'm proud to work for a president who's fighting for them, not mocking them from a Hollywood stage." The jab hit hard, and the crowd roared, split down the middle. Kimmel slammed his hand on the desk, his composure crumbling. "You're unbelievable. You twist everything to make him look good." The confrontation was spiraling, and the tension was palpable. Kimmel, desperate to land a blow, pulled up a tweet from Trump, one that had sparked controversy for its inflammatory language. "This is your guy, Karoline. This is who you defend." "You're okay with this kind of rhetoric?" he demanded, his voice shaking with indignation. The audience leaned in, waiting for Leavitt's response. She took a breath, her eyes locked on Kimmel's. "I'm okay with a president who speaks his mind and fights for the forgotten, Jimmy. What I'm not okay with is a media that takes his words out of context to fuel outrage. You're not reporting. You're performing." The crowd exploded, and Kimmel's face contorted with frustration. "That's not an answer!" he shouted, throwing his hands up. The exchange grew more heated, with Kimmel firing questions faster, each one more accusatory. Leavitt parried, every blow, her calm demeanor infuriating him further. At one point he cut her off mid-sentence, his voice booming. "You can't just keep blaming the media, Karoline. Own up to something." The audience gasped, and Leavitt's eyes narrowed, slightly the first sign of irritation. "I'm owning the truth, Jimmy. Maybe you should try it sometime." The retort was a dagger, and the crowd went wild, some chanting her name. Kimmel's hands shook as he grabbed his notes, his usual charm replaced by raw anger. Backstage, producers were panicking. The segment was a train wreck, and Kimmel's unraveling was becoming the story. Social media was flooded with memes of his red-faced outbursts, while Leavitt's poised responses were being hailed as masterclass. As the segment neared its end, Kimmel tried to regain control with a sarcastic quip. "Well, Karoline, you're definitely loyal. I'll give you that." But Leavitt had the last word. "It's not loyalty, Jimmy. It's conviction. Something you might not understand." The audience roared, and Kimmel's forced laugh couldn't hide his embarrassment. The cameras cut away, but the damage was done. Leavitt was winning, and Kimmel was on the ropes. What would he do to turn the tables? The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was a pressure cooker as the show barreled into its next segment. The audience, electrified by the ongoing clash, buzzed with anticipation, their phones lighting up with tweets and clips. Kimmel vs. Leavitt was a global phenomenon, with Leavitt's cool-headed jabs dominating the narrative. Jimmy Kimmel slouched in his chair, wiped sweat from his brow, his usual swagger buried under a tide of frustration. Karoline Leavitt sat opposite, her serene expression masking a razor-sharp focus. Backstage, producers were in chaos, barking orders to salvage the show. They'd begged Kimmel to pivot to humor, but his eyes burned with defiance. He was done playing nice. Kimmel kicked off the segment with a forced grin. "All right, Karoline, let's try something different. Maybe you can explain why your boss thinks he's above the law," he said, his voice thick with venom. The audience gasped, sensing the gloves were off. Leavitt tilted her head, unfazed. "Jimmy, you're assuming guilt where there's none. The American people see through these witch hunts, and they're tired of the media acting as judge and jury." Her calm delivery was a stark contrast to Kimmel's rising agitation, and the crowd erupted, split between cheers and boos. Kimmel's smile vanished. "Witch hunts? You're calling federal investigations witch hunts?" he snapped, his voice cracking. The confrontation escalated at breakneck speed. Kimmel pulled out a tablet, scrolling through a list of Trump's legal troubles. "Let's go through this. Fraud allegations, election interference, classified documents. You're telling me this is all fake?" he demanded, jabbing a finger at the screen. The audience leaned in, hanging on Leavitt's response. "I'm saying the truth matters, Jimmy. Half those cases are built on speculation, not evidence. You want to talk fraud? Let's talk about the media's track record of pushing false narratives." Her voice was steady, her eyes locked on his. The crowd roared, and Kimmel's face twisted with rage. "That's a cop-out!" he shouted, slamming the tablet down. The room was chaos, with audience members yelling over each other. Kimmel, desperate to regain control, leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're young, Karoline, but you're not naive. You know Trump's a liability. Why keep defending him?" The personal dig drew gasps, and Leavitt's eyes flashed with controlled anger. "I defend him because I believe in the people he fights for, Jimmy. Unlike you, I don't mock them from $1 million stage." The retort was a gut punch, and the audience exploded, some chanting her name. Kimmel's hands shook as he gripped his mug, his composure in tatters. Social media was a battlefield, with Leavitt's quotes racking up millions of likes. Memes of Kimmel's red-faced outbursts flooded every platform, while pundits praised Leavitt's poise. Backstage, producers were screaming into headsets, urging Kimmel to wrap it up. But he was spiraling. "You're not answering anything," he yelled, cutting Leavitt off as she tried to respond. "You just spin and dodge." The audience gasped at his aggression, and Leavitt raised an eyebrow. "I'm answering, Jimmy. You're just too angry to listen." Her calm rebuke silenced the room, and Kimmel's face burned with embarrassment. He tried a new tactic, pivoting to Trump's social media rants. "Your boss posts like a teenager, Karoline. You're okay with that?" he sneered, projecting a tweet on the screen. Leavitt didn't flinch. "He speaks directly to the people, Jimmy. You might not like it, but they do. That's why they trust him, not you." The crowd went wild and Kimmel's voice rose to a shout. "Trust him? He's a walking disaster." His outburst drew murmurs of discomfort, and Leavitt's faint smile returned. "The only disaster here, Jimmy, is you losing your cool on live TV." The segment was unraveling, and Kimmel's desperation was palpable. He fired off more questions, each one more hostile, but Leavitt parried effortlessly, her responses sharp and unflappable. The audience was on edge, sensing the breaking point was near. Kimmel, his voice hoarse, tried one last jab. "You're wasting your talent on a lost cause, Karoline. Wake up." Leavitt leaned forward, her voice low and piercing. "I'm wide awake, Jimmy, and I'm fighting for something bigger than your applause." The crowd erupted, and Kimmel's forced laugh couldn't mask his humiliation. The cameras lingered on his shaken expression as the segment ended, and whispers spread that the show was teetering on disaster. How much further could this go before it all collapsed? The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was a tinderbox as the final segment began, the audience's energy a volatile mix of excitement and unease. Jimmy Kimmel, his face flushed and eyes wild, sat hunched over his desk, clutching a crumpled stack of notes. Karoline Leavitt, poised and unshaken, met his glare with a calm intensity that seemed to unnerve him further. The cameras captured every tense moment, and online, why Kimmel vs. Leavitt was a runaway train, with millions dissecting every word. Backstage, producers were in full crisis mode, their headsets buzzing with pleas for Kimmel to pull back. But the host was beyond reason, his pride wounded, his control slipping. This was his stage, and he was determined to reclaim it, no matter the cost. Kimmel opened with a venomous smirk. "Welcome back, folks. Karoline, you've got a lot of fans out there, but let's cut through the noise. Your boss is a danger to democracy. You can't spin that away." His voice was raw, the accusation a desperate swing. The audience gasped, some cheering, others murmuring in discomfort. Leavitt's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Jimmy, the real danger is a media that vilifies half the country to push an agenda. I'm here for the people, not your sound bites." The crowd roared, split down the middle, and Kimmel's hands trembled as he gripped his desk. "You're delusional," he snapped, his voice echoing through the studio. The confrontation reached a fever pitch. Kimmel, unraveling, launched into a tirade, listing Trump's controversies, legal battles, inflammatory speeches, policy missteps. "You're defending a man who's tearing this country apart, Karoline. How do you live with that?" he shouted, his face inches from hers. The audience held its breath, sensing the breaking point. Leavitt leaned forward, her voice low but commanding. "I live with it by knowing I'm standing up for Americans who are sick of being lied to, Jimmy. You're not their voice. You're their critic." Her words cut through the noise, and the crowd exploded, some chanting her name. Kimmel's face contorted with rage, his composure gone. He tried to interrupt, but Leavitt pressed on, her voice rising with conviction. "You call it tearing the country apart, Jimmy, but I call it fighting for the forgotten. Farmers, factory workers, small-town families. They don't care about your jokes. They want someone who listens." The audience was on its feet, the divide palpable. Kimmel, desperate, cut her off. "That's enough. You're just a mouthpiece for a con man." His outburst was a mistake, and he knew it. The crowd gasped, and Leavitt's faint smile returned. "And you're a mouthpiece. For a machine that's lost touch with America, Jimmy. Who's the real con?" The retort was a knockout, and the studio shook with cheers and boos. Kimmel's breaking point came swiftly. "You know what, Karoline? I'm done with this. You're impossible," he yelled, standing up, his voice cracking. "Get off my stage!" The audience froze, stunned by the escalation. Producers rushed toward the set, but Leavitt remained seated, her expression serene. "I'll leave, Jimmy, but the truth doesn't," she said, her voice piercing the chaos. She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked off with a dignified stride, the crowd erupting in a mix of applause and outrage. Kimmel sank into his chair, his face pale, his hands shaking. The cameras caught every second of his humiliation, and the internet erupted. The fallout was immediate. Clips of Leavitt's exit went viral, racking up tens of millions of views. Pundits hailed her as a master of composure, while Kimmel's meltdown was mocked relentlessly, memes flooding every corner of social media. The hashtag #KimmelVsLeavitt trended for days, with Leavitt's final words, "The truth doesn't," becoming a rallying cry for her supporters. Kimmel, visibly shaken, tried to salvage the show with a weak monologue, but the damage was done. His reputation took a hit, with critics calling his behavior unprofessional and cruel. Leavitt, meanwhile, emerged triumphant, her calm defiance earning her respect, even from detractors. In the days that followed, Leavitt's star rose higher, her press briefings drawing record viewership. She never mentioned the incident, letting her performance speak for itself. Kimmel issued a half-hearted apology, but the public wasn't buying it. The confrontation became a cultural flashpoint, a symbol of a divided nation and a media at war with itself. For Leavitt, it was a victory, not just over Kimmel, but for the people she vowed to represent. The stage was empty, but her voice echoed on, unyielding and unbroken.